Well, welcome to Creating Development Goal Indicators, Bridging Data and Outcomes. And this will have a special emphasis today on Africa. It's part of our Evidence and Impact series. And I want to really thank every one of you for joining us today, whether you're here online in real time or you'll be listening to us afterwards. I do want to also warmly welcome all of the participants today that will be presenting and be our panelists, and we'll introduce them later. By the way, all of the bios for all of the panelists and the participants today will be in the chat, and so you can take a look at their full bio. I'm very pleased to join you today. FIP's vision is a world where everyone benefits from access to safe, effective, quality, and affordable medicines and health technologies. Our mission is to support global health by enabling the advancement of the pharmaceutical practice, pharmaceutical sciences, and pharmacy education. And so again, thank you very much. My name is Robert Sindelar, and by the role that I play as chair of the FIP Data Intelligence Commission, I have the pleasure of being one of the co-moderators today. I would like to introduce my other co-moderator, Chris John. Chris is the FIP lead for Evidence and Impact Digital Event Programs for this year. He's also the FIP lead for Data Intelligence and the FIP Data and Intelligence Commission Secretary, and does a tremendous job with that. Thank you very much, Chris. Next slide, please. Okay, the webinar is being recorded and will be live streamed via YouTube. The recording will be available on the FIP website for events. You may ask any questions using the question box that's provided at the bottom of the Zoom page. By all means, please do send in your questions. We'll answer them as soon as we can and during the panel discussion. You're welcome to provide feedback when this is over through the webinar site for FIP, and we do value your feedback. And if you're not a member of FIP, do please seriously consider joining. Next slide, please. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about developing a needs-based, data-driven culture. We're going to talk about the FIP development goals from both a regional and national priority, particularly with emphasis on Africa. We'll talk about the development and use of the indicators to track progress with the FIP development goals. And then we'll have a panel discussion with two experts in the field from this region. We'll also, Chris will do a quick summary and a close at the end. Next slide, please. We do hope that you'll learn a little bit more about needs-based data-driven culture and why this is important. We hope that we'll also identify approaches to measuring progress toward universal health coverage and health-related development goals. We'll describe the FIP development goal priorities and how indicators were developed, and we'll explain how monitoring and evaluation of these development goals contributes to the evidence of outcomes and impact, which is so important in our field. Next slide, please. Chris?
Thanks, Bob, and hello, everyone. Welcome. Of course, we wouldn't be here today without the FIP development goals, and you can see the 21 development goals on the screen right now. These were launched by FIP back in September 2020 and are a key resource for transforming the pharmacy profession over the next decade, globally, regionally, and nationally. They align with FIP's mission to support global health by enabling the advancement of pharmaceutical practice, sciences, and education, and are set to transform pharmacy in alignment with wider global imperatives underpinning the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So these are all mapped to the UN Sustainable Development Goal, particularly the one related to health, and therefore any monitoring of these goals will be helping to track progress towards universal health coverage, but obviously from a pharmacy perspective. This is the final set of webinars or events for the Evidence and Impact series that we've been running this year. Each of these events strongly align to Development Goal 11 and 12. Development Goal 11 is about impact and outcomes, and each development goal breaks down into workforce and education element, practice element, and science element. So these elements Within impact and outcomes, the workforce and education is about evidence of impact of the pharmaceutical workforce, the practice element, evidence of the impact of pharmaceutical services, and the science element about having strategies and programs in place to enable timely access to safe, effective, and affordable medical products. This event also links to Development Goal 12, which is pharmacy intelligence. The workforce and education element of that is a national strategy and corresponding actions to collate and share workforce data and workforce planning being in place. The practice element about having a comprehensive national strategy to collate, share, and utilize intelligence on service provision, development, delivery, etc. And the science element about having data-driven strategies to accelerate pharmaceutical research, development, and manufacturing and market approval of medical products. So the Global Pharmaceutical Observatory is really the engine room of pharmaceutical data collection globally. Its work links strongly to Development Goal 12, but also, or any of the other development goals, depending on what data is being collected. And the FIP GPO will measure and monitor progress towards the development goals. And that's why really we're here today. The GPO's mission centers around data, intelligence, advocacy, and reporting. And we know from the pandemic the importance of data and for data to provide us with evidence which demonstrates impact. Data is also important, obviously, for decision making and supporting quality improvement. So our first task is always to collate valid global data on workforce, education, practice, and pharmaceutical science. We must undertake comprehensive analyses of collated data to provide accessible, high-quality intelligence. And all this must be communicated innovatively to promote our member organizations' impact on health. This communication will often be via the FIP Atlas, which is our visualization platform for displaying our data and intelligence across the globe. And finally, we will produce evidence-based strategic information reports and guidance on the application of pharmaceutical science, policies, practices, and services. Just briefly going to show you the work of the Global Pharmaceutical Observatory, the GPO. The real first stream of work is the Multinational Needs Assessment Programme, where we continue to take a tried and tested needs-based approach to addressing data and development goal challenges. And this programme consists of various projects where we focus in on particular needs-based approaches. So one project we did earlier in the year is about booster vaccination and nations' needs to widen access to vaccinations and using pharmacists to do that. We have the FIP Atlas, which I've mentioned, and this is our platform for showcasing our members' needs and priorities, supported by data from the GPO. And this allows FIP to identify opportunities for developing pharmacy with, for, and through our member organizations. And we produce a variety of dashboards that visualize the data we produce from projects. The GPO database is the repository for FIP's pharmacy and pharmaceutical science data. It contains data that will inform the indicators to track progress against the FIP development goals. And of course, the FIP development goals provide the framework for needs assessments and prioritization for member organizations to undertake relevant to their national situation. And we will be talking a bit about prioritized development goals later on in this event. So in turn, our priorities can provide each organization with the foundations for mapping the progress and transformations for their workforce, practice, and pharmaceutical science. The main focus of this event being the indicators, the development goal indicators are, of course, our way to measure and monitor progress and transformations for the workforce, practice, and pharmaceutical science elements of the development goals. Finally, and Bob will be talking a bit more about this in a moment, the Data Intelligence Commission is our key advisory body on the direction of the GPO, and we engage with our members there, but also more widely via our Data and Intelligence Digital Events Programme, of which today is one. So I will hand back to Bob.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'll talk a little bit about the Data Intelligence Commission. The commission meets on a regular basis. It has representatives from across all of the regions in the world and member organizations and functions of FIP. The commission provides strategic advice to FIP on the advocacy and delivery of the GPO program. The commission recently made 8 recommendations after in-depth study for steps to the development of a needs-based data-driven culture, which we think will be very important for us to go forward. FIP should develop common and accessible guidance and terminology on data collection, processing, synthesis, and analysis. FIP should develop and adapt for both pharmacy practice and the pharmaceutical sciences, the World Health Organization's data principles. FIP should consider what it can offer to member organizations as added value to that membership with respect to data. FIP should serve as a global resource for collecting and disseminating the very best data practices and successes. Digital health, population health management, and data literacy learning outcomes should be incorporated into pharmacy's initial education, as well as the training curricula and post-registration competency frameworks. FIP should continue to advocate for pharmacy to have full access and writability to patient electronic health records. The FIP GPO should serve and develop a clear and transparent governance process to enable data sharing between member organizations, and each FIP structure, constituency, and forum should identify a data champion who can be supported by the GPO team. Chris?
Thanks, Bob. So to the FIP development goal indicators, I mentioned earlier that we have the FIP development goals that are really split into the elements of workforce practice and science, and they're the fundamental categories of the development goals. Under those, we have the mechanisms, which are tools and structures to facilitate and support the process of transformation towards the development goals. And then underneath that, at the bottom of the pyramid, we have the indicators. And they are really about measuring and monitoring the progress towards the development goals, of the development goals. And indicators will be used to support member organizations and nations to identify where improvements are needed, to set priorities for quality improvement and support, to create national dashboards displaying data against priority development goals, to benchmark performance against international data, and to support national quality improvement schemes, as well as demonstrating progress that pharmacy is making in support of health systems outcomes. So we do use a lot of data to really advocate on behalf of the profession. So back to Bob.
Today, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Lena Bader. I'll mention also that with Dr. Bader, as with all of our speakers and our panelists, the knowledge and skills and accomplishments they bring forward for today are really quite distinguished and extensive, and we won't be able to introduce them to the full opportunity that we really should, and their bios will be listed in the chat. But briefly, if I might, it is truly a pleasure to introduce Dr. Bader. She is the FIP lead for Equity, Sustainability, Policy, and Development. She leads the FIP Development Goals program of work and has done a fantastic job with that. And she is a trained and registered pharmacist. Dr. Bader.
Thank you so much, Robert, for that very kind introduction, and to Chris for setting the scene for my brief, but hopefully very important presentation, sharing some of the priorities that our members have reported to us from the region. I just want to start by saying that developing indicators is a very important milestone for the Development Goals program as a whole, and we cannot measure progress without indicators, but we also need to set priorities in order to identify national and regional progress aims and goals. So today I'd like to do a very brief overview of some of the global priorities that we have identified as FIP through our members, also what they look like on a regional level for Africa in particular, and some more of an in-depth overview of the national priorities as well. So the next slide just reminds everyone, if you're not already aware of this report we published in 2021, a year on after the the publication of the development goals. This report, setting goals for the decade ahead, summarizes everything we've done in the immediate months after the goals have launched in terms of identifying what the priorities are globally, regionally, and nationally. So I know some of my colleagues will be dropping in the link to this report in the chat, which will provide you with a full overview of the priorities across the 6 regions of the world. And I'll be sharing some snippets from this today. And the next report, the next slide emphasizes that we have done this priority identification for all 6 regions of the world. And when we launched the development goals, we made on the same day as FIP a commitment to all our members to support them in identifying their priorities, developing the indicators in order to measure progress and support them with transformation. And here we are today, 2 years almost since we've launched the goals, and we have delivered on that. We have conducted regional engagement strategy meetings and engagement interviews with our members in 2021. Starting in April with some high-level meetings, as well as the first set of regional engagement meetings that we have delivered during COVID-19, but also right after the development goals. In the summer, between July and September, we conducted a second set of regional engagement meetings that built on the first ones and continued that roadmap and priority identification process for each of the 6 regions. In October, we carried on with some more in-depth member interviews to further understand their needs, their best practices, and how we can support them. And in November, we ran a third set of regional engagement meetings so we can have a full picture of the needs, and all of the outcomes of this were published in the report I mentioned. We continue in 2022 and into the future our regional engagement meetings and strategies, because we recognize that priorities change over time and we have to be adaptive to that and continue to support our members on a regular basis. And the next slide, you can see this colorful bar chart, which provides the global snapshot of priority development goals. On the left, you'll see that the number of member organizations, and on the horizontal axis, you'll see the 21 goals. And of course, we have aggregated the data per each of the 6 regions. And you'll see there is some variation, unsurprisingly, in terms of which of the goals are priorities globally. Some of the goals have been identified more than others around the world by multiple regions as priorities. And you can see the highest bars on that chart. For example, goals number 4, advanced and specialist development, goal number 7, advancing integrated services, goal 13, policy development, and many more. We have been reported by the majority of the members as priority goals. So we can definitely see here a pattern of common global goals across the world, and some goals with less commonality, if I might say. And these include the shorter bars you see, for example, number 6, leadership development, number 10, equity and equality, 11, impact and outcomes, and 12, pharmacy intelligence. And we are, of course, still continuing to work with our members to understand why they've identified their priorities as priorities, and what does that mean for the rest of the goals they haven't identified as priorities. In the next slide, we are able to see the same results, but perhaps in a different way. So in order to simplify the way the priorities have been identified, we have divided up into 3 levels: first level priority goals, second level priority goals, and third level priority goals. It's very important here to say that this doesn't mean that the third or second are less important than the first. This is just a visual way of illustrating the frequency of the priorities. So you see the most commonly identified goals across the world are the first level priority goals. Number 1, academic capacity. Number 4, advanced and specialist development. Number 7, advancing integrated services. 13, policy development. 15, people-centered care. 19, patient safety, not surprisingly. 20, digital health, and 21, sustainability in pharmacy. And you can view the rest in more detail in the report. The next slide provides a little bit more of a regional focus. So we have worked with, of course, members across all regions, but from Africa, we have had responses from 4 member organizations in Africa. And I'm about to share some of those priorities regionally. So the next slide shows the regional priorities, again, similarly to the way I've illustrated the one for global priorities, but this is the African ones based on 4 member organizations. First level priority goals, not too dissimilar to the ones before, but 1, academic capacity. Quality assurance was important. Number 9 is actually continuing professional development. And number 18 is access to medicine. So we can see some number 1 being common with the global priorities, but there are 3 other important priorities for the region that perhaps are more specific to Africa than the rest of the world. And you see the second level priority goals, third level priority goals. So it's very clear what some of the top priorities are for the region. And I know we will be having a discussion on this through the panel later on today. And in the next but final slide for me is a very high-level overview. I won't go into too much detail, and I'd like to invite you to read through the report, because in the report, we also describe all of the case studies, the best practices, the lessons learned from our members on how they're progressing some of the goals and their priorities. But this is just to illustrate that we've had the 4 member organizations spanning Algeria, Ghana, Nigeria, and South Africa. And you'll see which priorities have been identified. And of course, it is important here to say that we will continue to engage with the other members from the region to also support them in identifying their priorities. We will continue to check in with these countries and more to review and refresh their priorities if needed. And we will be supporting our members directly by sharing best practices from other members around the world on how they've identified their priorities, but also how they are using the development goals to transform pharmacy on a local level. This is our commitment from day 1 since we launched the goals, and will continue throughout the next years, especially as we see through the 2030 decade of action that pharmacy is participating in with the rest of the world. Thank you so much, and look forward to receiving any questions you have via the chat. Please use the Q&A tool. Very happy to engage with you throughout the rest of the event. Thank you so much. Chris, back to you.
Thank you so much, Lena, for giving us that in-depth analysis of global development goal priorities and also the priorities for Africa. It's now my great pleasure to introduce a double act for you today from members of the Global Pharmaceutical Observatory team, who will be talking about creating development goal indicators. And first of that wonderful double act is Dr. Shirley Malianti, who is our FIP Data and Intelligence Specialist. And we also have Diala Kumani, who is a researcher based at the FIP UCL Collaborating Center, and who has been undertaking a great deal of research into the development goal indicators. So I will hand the floor to Shirley first, and take it away, Shirley.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for the introduction. Well, hi, everyone. So today we will discuss about the development goals indicators. So as part of the FIP development goals, as Dr. Bader previously mentioned, and also Chris already mentioned, if I remind you again, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, Shirley. Please do carry on.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Apologize. So yeah, as part of the FIP development goals that we mentioned before, and if you remember, Chris previously mentioned about the pyramid, and the third pyramid is basically the third layer, which is about the growing set of global tools and structure and programs that we already share from FIP, and all of them is actually available to facilitate and support the process of transformation. And that's the third layer, and we will discuss today about the fourth layer, which is the indicators. So during these past 2 years, FIP focused on engaging our members around the world, and Dr. Bader previously also already mentioned about how FIP development goals has been implemented in the nation to identify their priorities, to identify their needs, to map their needs towards the development goals as well. So that's about the implementation. And in Seville, we also continue our discussion with the FIP development goals mapping and implementation effort across our different member organizations. And we will continue to do so with our members to share practice, experience, and also approaches from our member organization. So now, since the development goals has been used in the needs assessment across countries and has been implemented as well in the countries regarding their priorities. And now it is time for us to monitor and also to evaluate the progress towards the goals and how we will do this. And it will be through the goal indicators, which we will discuss today. So the GPO team has designed and developed progress indicators to support the tracking progress towards these goals. And I would like to hand over now to my colleagues, Diala Kotmani, who will describe the process of the development of FIP DG's indicators. Diala, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Shirley, for this introduction, and thank you all for joining us today. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah. Oops, I think you can see me now. Okay, thank you all for joining us today at this event. I will start now by giving a brief overview of the project, highlighting the different data collection and analysis method used throughout the development process of the development of the Global FIP Development Goals. As we can see here on the slide, the process involved conducting a series of qualitative research methods, including a desktop literature review, followed by a Delphi method, and this was stage 1 of the project. Later, a quantitative online questionnaire was incorporated into the second stage of or the global engagement stage. And I think many of our today's attendees are familiar with this questionnaire image presented here on the slide and answered this questionnaire. So I would like to thank you all for your valuable contribution. For the analysis, also qualitative and quantitative analysis methods were performed to analyze both stages to develop the final presented list of global FIP development indicators shown here on the slide. Next slide, please, Chris. In this slide, I will go into more detail about the methodology and the data collection process. As I mentioned in my previous slide, a mixed method research design was employed, qualitative and quantitative. The aim of the stage 1, the qualitative stage, was to identify the initial draft list of global FIP development goals indicators. Therefore, the development of proposed indicators involved first a content analysis of the relevant documents and the existing data collected from global published reports and surveys by the WHO and FIP. This was followed by a Delphi process to identify and develop potential indicators aligned and mapped to the 21 FIP development goals. So the aim of the Delphi method was to reach an initial consensus on the proposed list of indicators assigned by an expert group. And this led to the development of 21 unvalidated proposed list of indicators covering different aspects of its development goal and ready to use in the next stage. Subsequently, in stage 2, or the quantitative stage or the global engagement stage, the aim of this stage was to construct the validity and the reliability of the proposed and validated development indicators produced from stage 1 in terms of the indicators' relevancy and availability or accessibility, but from a global perspective. So the outcomes of the Delphi method were presented for wider engagement and used to conduct a global cross-sectional online questionnaire to assess and validate the relevancy and availability of the 21 proposed list of progress indicators. The 21 questionnaire links were disseminated during a series of FIP digital events held in 2021. One event was held for each development goal, where the attendees of each digital event, who were international pharmacists working across different sectors and career stages, participated in this short questionnaire. Also, a follow-up or an invitation email was sent to global pharmacy leaders who represent their professional leadership association or bodies to participate in this questionnaire through the FIP different sections and constituencies as well. Next slide, please. This slide here showed the analysis and main outcomes of stage 1. As I mentioned earlier, a content analysis approach was undertaken to draft the primary pharmacy core indicators. And the output was the development of the GPO core indicators handbook, comprising a list of 127 pharmacy-related core indicators. And this handbook list was used as input for the Delphi method. Afterwards, an expert group of international pharmacists volunteered to contribute in anonymous 2-round Delphi method, and they were asked to assign the relevancy of indicators listed in the GPO indicators handbook and the published FIP Development Goals mechanism against each DG or against its development goal. The expert group was also asked to provide further review and feedback on the output of the first round. Eventually, after amending and incorporating all expert group comments and reviews, an initial consensus was met, and 21 proposed lists of 165 unvalidated indicators were developed aligned to the 21 development goals. The output of the Delphi method was formatted into a questionnaire to be used for the global engagements or the stage 2. Next slide, please, Chris. Okay, moving on to the descriptive analysis for stage 2, which is the online questionnaire, a total of 755 participants responded to the 21 online questionnaire from different practice areas and the 6 WHO regions. As we can see here on the slide, that the Western Pacific and European regions were the regions with the highest response rate, with like 31 and 23% respectively. And the responses from the other 4 regions were nearly evenly distributed. Okay. Sorry, I think I have some problems with my video. Okay, so this slide, next slide, please, Chris. Yeah, this slide is a bit a heavy slide. Okay, maybe. Okay, sorry. This slide is a bit a heavy slide and show the statistical analysis performed for this stage. So based on the 2 questions listed in the online questionnaire about describing the relevancy and availability of the proposed indicators, 2 selection criteria were set to determine if an indicator is a globally valid and measurable indicator. So as we can see here on the slide, the first criteria is the relevance of the proposed indicators to measure progress for each relevant development goal from a global perspective. And the second criterion is the availability or the accessibility of these proposed indicators in different countries. So this figure here shows that the first approach, which is the outliers detection using the box plot examination to identify the not relevant indicators. And the analysis resulted in the exclusion of 10 indicators from the initially proposed list, I mean from the 165 indicators. As you can see here from the next figure, the second approach is here by setting or establishing 3 evidence-based thresholds to indicate the level of performance or the level of usability of the indicators. As illustrated here in the diagram, for example, if the availability of an indicator is above or equal 60%, it's classified as a usable indicator. If the availability is between 40 to 59%, it's classified as a problematic indicator. And if the availability is below 40%, it's classified as a not usable or rejected indicator. For the analysis of this stage, only the relevant indicators which passed the first criterion were used and compared with the country responses to ensure the indicators' availability and accessibility in order to meet the second criterion. And the analysis of this stage generated 109 usable indicators ready to be tested after meeting both criteria, and 40 also produced 40 problematic indicators to be reviewed later, and also produced 16 indicators that were rejected. Moving on to the final stage or the final slide, please, first. So this is the final slide, and I will point out here the resulting key outcomes. So first, the main outcomes is a set of correlated and validated transnational evidence-based indicators that will monitor development goals progress worldwide and support countries in the process of their pharmacy advancement and transformation. The second main point is that the final list of development goals indicators was presented in the 21 development goals and across the 3 development goals elements, workforce education, practice, and pharmaceutical science, with 1 indicator under each development goal at least. It's also worth mentioning that some development goals, particularly the one that we can see here on the slide, DG 11, impact and outcomes, DG 12, pharmacy intelligence, and DG 20, digital health, have only 1 or 2 indicators under the final list of usable or approved indicators. However, the questionnaire analysis showed that the initially proposed indicators of these goals were relevant to the context area of these goals. They met the first criterion of a measurable global indicators in terms of relevancy, but didn't meet the second criterion, the availability and accessibility assessment in the respondent countries. But I think we can agree, or we can say here, that although data and intelligence, the focus areas of these 3 DGs, are considered new emerging areas and show rapid growth in the healthcare field, the existence of national strategies and systems of implementation is still relatively limited, and then lack of measures to monitor service impact and health outcomes is expected. Finally, the developed list of indicators was also clustered into 5 categories to present the development goals indicators as a second dimension. So, for example, we have capacity type indicators, where data is expressed as numbers, like the number of pharmacists, pharmacies, etc. We also have impact type indicators to measure the impact and health outcomes of the pharmaceutical services provided. We also have pharmaceutical services and facilities type indicators, which focus on the availability of the pharmaceutical services, facilities, and the infrastructure needed. We also have policies and regulatory systems type indicators, which focus on the regulation and strategies as drivers to shape the structure of the needed system to improve healthcare outcomes. Finally, we have training and professional development goals type indicators, which focus on developing competencies and skills across all sectors and career stages. And this was a short overview of how the global FIP development goals were developed as evidence-based driven global developmental work using research method to support tracking progress toward the FIP development goals. Thank you all for your listening, and I will hand it over again to my colleague, Shirley. She will take you through the project next step. Shirley, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diala, for such comprehensive information about the development of the DG's indicators. So, after the DG's indicators. So, as we have heard from Diala previously, this globally validated list of indicators across all DGs will monitor the progress worldwide to support each country in the process of their transformation, to support their workforce, their education, their practice, and also pharmaceutical sciences. So what we will do now, we are currently developing a tool for selecting the indicators, and following up on that, we will develop a DG indicator framework as a tool for selecting the indicator and also to monitor and evaluate the indicators framework. And this will also enable the design of Global Atlas dashboard that will drive and inform the progress towards the development goals. So that would be the plan for the next step. So Chris, if we can go to the next slide, where I will inform a little bit about the development goals indicator framework related to what are their aim and what are their objectives. So the aim is basically to support tracking progress, gain of pharmacy practice, workforce education, and science elements of the DGs at a national or member organization levels. And our DG's indicator framework have a specific objectives as listed here, which is the first one is to support our member organizations to track and monitor progress towards the development goals. And the second things will be to align the DG monitoring with existing member organization or national monitoring frameworks in order to synergize globally comparable progress monitoring and improvement efforts to address data gaps and also to minimize the reporting burdens. So that's the second objective. And the last objective is to enable global tracking of the progress of member organizations and stakeholders towards the development goals through the provision and alignment of a global set of indicators that can assist in multinational review of aggregated data. Chris, if you can bring us to the next slide, which is about the intended benefits of the development goals indicator framework. It is our hope that the DG's indicator framework will synergize the global, national, global, regional, and national monitoring efforts, and it will provide the following benefits. So we are hoping that a framework of indicators that member organizations or nations can tailor this to their specific context to monitor their progress against the development goals. And it is hoping that this can reduce variability across nations by providing a standardized monitoring framework mapped to the development goals. And lastly, it will provide guidance on areas that is not traditionally measured by member organizations or nations. And if we can go to the next slide, we will talk a little bit about the proposed process for tracking the development goals. So there are 4 steps mentioning in here. The first step will be, we can select the development goals to be tracked. And in order to do this, we can prioritize the DGs based on the needs and priorities, and we can identify a general or broad areas where there are active or ongoing policies or projects mapped to the FIP DGs related to the nations. And after we select the development goals to be tracked, then we can select the right indicators. Indicators are useful to provide measurable results to demonstrate progress towards development goals. It's also useful to identify area that needs attention or needs opportunities for improvement. And it also useful to support the continuous improvement. And then we can follow by the develop monitoring and evaluation framework. And this is basically a systematic approach to gather and analyze information in order to enable the judgment regarding the impact in relation to the measure. We need to consider like a specific questions that are needed to answer to assess or track the progress with their DGs. What is that we need to monitor? And we also need to link this to the data sources that we have and how this will be reported. And lastly, is about improvement, how we can do a continuous improvement. We need to regularly update it Atlas dashboard to showcase data, to inform and to monitor the best practice and also the trends across the development goals over time. That's more or less the process for the tracking development goals. And I think we can go to the next slide. And I would like to thank everyone to listen to us. And I will offer back now to Bob. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so very much, Shirley. Wonderful presentation. I think it really does bring to the audience just the depth and breadth of all of the work that's going on with the GPO, and particularly in developing and creating the development goal indicators. So next, we're going to have our panel discussion. I certainly would like to thank each of the panelists for the time that they're giving us in this event, creating development goal indicators, bridging data and outcomes. And we have 2 really outstanding panelists. Next slide, please. We first have Dr. Prosper Hiak. He's a newly elected FIP Vice President. He's President of the African Pharmaceutical Forum and a member of the FIP Data and Intelligence Commission. So thank you for joining us. Our next panelist is Dr. Dennis A. Wheaty. He's a member of the FIP Data and Intelligence Commission, a member of the African Pharmaceutical Forum, EXCO, and Executive Secretary, Pharmaceutical Society of Ghana. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for joining us. Maybe a nice way to start, if we can, is do the regional development goal priorities described earlier in Dr. Lena Bader's session resonate with your national needs? Maybe you can talk about it from a national perspective, and maybe we'll start with Prosper first.
Thank you, Bob. What I wanted to say is this: the development goals that we put in place in 2 years ago, came like a kind of blessing to guide us, to guide our countries, to guide our organizations. So what Lena presented was the result of what we gave as element in the process of putting in place and highlighting the development goals. The first and the main priority in the development goals was the academic capacity. Without academic capacity, we cannot build the profession. We cannot build our organization. Having initial capacity, education, academy well installed. So it's the basic, the first step for the development of the profession. For that, we need data, collecting data on education, collecting data on academia, collecting data on university, the number of young people trained, the number of lecturers, the number of hours of courses of classes in the university. All this is important. The second one was the quality assurance. Why? Because we need strong regulation in our countries about quality assurance to be sure of the product of the medicine that are coming in the country. We need access for quality medicines with the 18 development goals, which is for me fundamental. And what have happened last days in Gambia is with the death of many children is highlighting the fact that we need an organization, we need to improve access on quality medicines, we need good regulations, and this is one of the main priority in our continent. I will come back to the continuing professional education development and advancing and specialist development. These are for me at the beginning, at this stage, for my first word, what I wanted to say, and we'll come back in the discussion with you and Dennis. Thank you.
Great, thank you so very much. Dennis, your thoughts?
Thank you very much, Bob. So for me, I think if you look at a particular context of Africa in terms of where we are and how we are looked at globally, I think with the development, it's also the same with the practices that include pharmacy and others. So for me, even the entire global, the FIP development goals are relevant for us. But of course, we can't do all at a go. So it's important that we prioritize. So starting from even the training where we need academic capacity. Of course, most of our lecturers in the past had trained outside. Most of them would do their MPhil and MSc and then PhDs outside before coming back to the continent to help in the training. So academic capacity is where it all starts. The quality of the pharmacists or pharmaceutical scientists we produce will be based on the academic capacity we have. So for me, I think what Linda presented in terms of what came out of the survey among the 4 African countries was relevant. Ghana, in our particular context, we chose only 3 because we thought that we couldn't do more than 3 if we want to properly prioritize. So we started with the advanced and specialist pharmacist development because we already had a law that was passed in 2012, which was an amalgamation of laws that brought together specialist medical practice, specialist pharmacy practice, and then specialist nursing practice. So since there was a law, we thought that we should help in enforcing the law in terms of how we used to train a specialist pharmacists. We should write on the back of what is being done in medical field, where you had gynecologists, you had ophthalmologists, and the others. We could then, in that same vein, continue. So that's how come we selected advanced and specialist pharmacy development. And then we also selected FIP, which was the competency development. In the past, we only had one school of pharmacy training all pharmacists. However, in the recent past, we now have 7 schools. And so we can't allow everyone to be doing what they think. So we thought that there should be a competency framework that will guide all of them. Of course, you can have a few variances here and there, but there should be, when they say somebody is a pharmacist graduated from Ghana who is registered to practice, everyone should be assured of the competency of that pharmacist. So we thought that that should be the starting point. And then in the early practice years, they should also have the privilege to do advanced and specialist practice where they can narrow in what direction they want to go. And then the third one we chose was digital health. And we did that because with the advent of the internet, you realize that a lot was happening on the internet. And my president, Prosper, made mention of what happened in Mali and in Gambia, where ethylene glycol was used to produce some cough syrups, where people bought and then children died. And for me, I think that it is important that we regulate the e-pharmacy side of our practice, because if people can order drugs or medicines online and it is delivered to them at the blind side of the profession or the pharmacist, then we could have that avenue being used to put a lot of substandard and then fake medicines into circulation. So we thought that we should move quickly to see if we can control it. Thankfully, this year, we were able to, with the leadership of the Pharmacy Council of Ghana, to develop the e-pharmacy policy, which was launched by the Vice President of the country. And subsequently, we have developed the National Electronic Pharmacy Platform. So anyone who wants to do anything pharmacy online, you need to be logged on onto that platform, and which then will regulate the supply of medicines digitally. So these are my initial thoughts. Thank you, Bob.
Fantastic, Dennis. Thank you. Both of you have talked about the priorities as you've seen them within your region, within your countries. But one of the successes is going to be not only identifying those priorities, but being able to go ahead and track progress against these priorities. And maybe what we could talk about next is a little bit about what maybe those gaps are. So in other words, if you might take one of the most important priorities that you've identified, talk about what is the data and intelligence that's needed to track that, you think, well, and what is the data you're able to collect? What's the gap that's there? And maybe we'll start with Dennis, if that's okay. Dennis?
Yeah, thank you very much, Bob. So if we, for instance, in my special case of Ghana, if we took the goal 4, the pharmacy development goal, FIP development goals 4, the advanced and specialist development, pharmacy development. There is a college that has been established, the Ghana College of Pharmacists, led by a rector that has a president, and I'm honored to be a foundation fellow of the college. We have various departments. Unfortunately, in terms of where to look, in terms of how we build, there are various ideas as to what we think we should do. For me, the gap there would be, how do we identify what is now on the ground in terms of, so we need a survey to get a baseline data in terms of what capacities we have, what specialists we have on the ground. And then between that and what is needed, we are able to then have the needs assessment. Then based on that, we can then put forward where the training needs are. And then we are able to then get pharmacists with interest in those areas to get trained. A few are going on, but I think there should be a more comprehensive framework that identifies what is on the ground, what is the ideal, and in between what we are able to then do. Then we can track that. Once we establish the needs in terms of the needs assessment, then we can, and we establish the needs, then we can track how we meet them annually, and then we can then report on it. So I think we can do the same for the other goals as well, like the competency development framework, like the schools. What are they doing now? How do we have the pharmacy council, the regulator, and then the regulator of the academic institutions? We help them develop a competency-based framework, and then the schools that are able to take them on board, and then we can track their implementation as to the number of academic specialists or pharmacists with the right pharmacists and pharmaceutical scientists with the right qualification that be available, and then how many they train in a year, and how they also are able to follow the framework consistently. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Prosper, your thoughts about this?
Yes, I would just want to add two things about academic capacity and access to medicine, device, and services. We in the region, we are launching an association of School of Pharmacy in which we want to collect more information about the gaps between the university to come to an harmonization of pharmacy schools. Why? Because we need pharmacy school well organized and pharmacists coming from the school well trained for all our countries. No matter the difference of the language or the difference of cultures, we need pharmacies well trained. We have put in place that association. We have criteria of registration of universities, and we are now going in the process of development and harmonization of curricula to have a strong workforce to push the universities, the pharmacy school in the continent. The second point that I wanted to highlight is the access to medicine, to quality medicines. We had a program with FIP of training of students in university, curriculum in universities of 5 universities in Africa, 2 francophones and 3 English-speaking universities, where we have started to teach them the detection of falsified and substandard medicines, to begin detecting, knowing the danger of this product and how to track them. With tracking them means also using digitalizations, which is one other FIP development goals. I think with these 3 points, with the indicators given by Lena and Shirley, we are going to use them for the development of the capacity of our future pharmacists coming from that school. We now want to expand the programs of falsified and substandard medicines curriculum in all the continents, in all the regions, from the north to the south of the continent. These are elements that I wanted to put in the discussions.
Great, thank you very much. Gentlemen, really do appreciate your thoughts and comments about this. They're really important as we go forward. And I want to thank you so much for taking your valuable time and sharing it with us today. Based on the time, I think, Chris, I'll turn it over to you to close, and I want to thank everybody for joining us. Chris, your comments and thoughts.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks to our panelists for their expertise and wisdom. So just to wrap up and conclude on today's event, we've heard of the work of the Global Pharmaceutical Observatory and its programs, including the Development Goal Indicators development. We've heard from Lena about some of the global priorities for development goals and how they are being prioritized regionally across Africa and nationally as well. We had an in-depth look at the methodology of the development of the development goal indicators from Diala, and Shirley has taken us through how we plan to get those development goal indicators used through the monitoring and evaluation framework that we are developing, which we will release very soon. We have 109 development goal indicators. Of course, we haven't had time to go through them all today, and we will revisit them in future. A very good example of an indicator you may be aware of is numbers of pharmacists per 10,000 population. That's how we might track capacity for the workforce globally. In fact, Dennis has given us another indicator in the panel discussion about talking about the number of schools of pharmacy in his country. It gives us an indication of capacity around developing pharmacists in Ghana. So our panelists very eloquently describing what their national and regional priorities are and what data is needed really to help with tracking progress towards those. So if you would like to know any further information about the Global Pharmaceutical Observatory, we do have a microsite and the address is on the screen now. We also have an events website if you want to know anything more and check out future FIP digital events. Please check it at events.fip.org. I really would like to thank all of our speakers today and panelists for all of their work and input, and it's been very stimulating to hear what is going on. I'd also like to thank my co-moderator, Dr. Robert Sindelar, for his moderation of the event, and thank you all for attending, and